It was thick and alive in Louisiana in 1858. The air smelled like wet earth, falling leaves, and the sickly sweetness of sugar cane. People felt it on their skin and in their very being, and it often held secrets. But the secret that was found under the grand, falling-apart beauty of Bellichasse Plantation was the most disturbing and basically wrong. Imagine a child who is not a ghost or a whisper of a memory, but a real person who has been found. In a field, not on a road, but in the thick darkness below the floorboards of a huge antebellum house by themselves. For how long? No one knew. What did she eat? What did she drink? How did she stay alive with the rats, the snakes, the oppressive heat, and the loneliness? The questions kept coming, like Spanish moss on old oak trees. Each one was heavier than the last, and they all hinted at a scarier, deeper truth. It wasn't about a kid getting lost in the woods or a teen hidden in a barn. This child had made a home in the ignored space between the ground and the foundations of a house. The house was full of people who said they knew every person who lived on their huge property. What scared me the most was why no one had reported her missing. Why didn't anyone look for her? It was enough to make their blood boil to think that there was a small, silent life living in the empty space below their feet that they couldn't see. Graves left empty. It was a find that would help solve more than one puzzle. The Vogeland family would lose faith in everything they thought they knew about themselves and their world. It was proof that the scariest things aren't always the ones that scream. Sometimes they're just there, living in the quiet, forgotten places of people's apathy. Leave a comment below telling us where you are before we go into more detail about what happened at Bellichasse Plantation. To listen from. If you're new, enter your email address and click the bell. You won't want to miss the new stories we post every week. Let us go back to Louisiana now. 1858. Bellichasse Plantation wasn't just a bunch of houses. Louisiana's rich, harsh soil was the foundation of this kingdom. It was on the western shore of the Mississippi River, about 40 miles south of Baton Rouge, and its sugarcane fields went on for miles. A green sea that whispers under thee. The summer sun never goes away. The main house, a large two-story building with wide verandas and tall white columns, used to be the most beautiful French Creole home in the area. As of 1858, there was a light peeling of paint, a slight tilt to a shutter, and a lingering dampness in the air that not even the strongest breezes from the river could quite get rid of. The thick, sweet smell of molasses from the nearby sugar mill mixed with the earthy smell of the river and the faint smell of copper tang of the cane fields, making a unique scent that was almost too strong to resist that made Bellichasse famous. Armand Vlan, the master of Bellichasse, was a man in his early 50s. His family had been in the area since the first French residents. His features were sharp, and his eyes were a pale, cold blue that didn't seem to miss anything but also didn't show much. He moved in a quiet, almost predatory way, and his mind was always on ledgers, crop returns, and the complicated and sometimes cruel math of his business. He was a man of order and tradition who was admired in the parish. His word was as strong as the cypress beams that held up his house. Armand, on the other hand, was cold, and even his closest friends and family kept their distance from him. He thought of the world in terms of assets and liabilities. People's lives, especially those who were under his control, were often seen as liabilities. His wife, Adelaide Vauquelin, who was in her late 40s, was very different from him. She was born in South Carolina to a well-known family and raised with a sensitive mind, well-versed in literature and music, and filled with a quiet, almost frail faith. The wealth of Bellichasse, the sheer size of its activities, and the brutality of the system it was based on had always made her feel uneasy. Her days were spent running the house, keeping an eye on the housekeepers, and taking care of her small, well-kept rose garden, which stood out against the plantation's dull greens and browns. She had deep worries that she never talked about. Her discomfort, with her world taking the form of a constant, almost ghostly friend, and her tendency to withdraw into her thoughts. She wanted a different life and a different time, but the currents of her life were too strong for her to fight. Nettie, a woman in her early 30s who was a slave, walked through the grand house so quickly that it was hard to notice. She had skin the color of rich earth and dark, smart eyes that didn't miss a thing going on in the Vauquelin home. She was Armand's friend, a servant and Adelaide's most trusted housekeeper, a place that gave her a unique, if dangerous, view of things. She knew the rhythms of the house, the stresses that weren't said, and the small changes in mood that meant trouble was coming. Nettie was a strong woman who didn't show it. Her views were sharp, and when people asked for her advice, she gave it with the kind of wisdom that comes from having to survive. People did trust her, but in that world, faith was fragile and always tainted by the threat of arbitrary power. The slave community's living areas were beyond the main house, out into the shimmering heat. Hundreds of people worked in the cane fields. Their lives were controlled by the sun's rise and fall, the crop's needs, and their boss's whims. There was a world inside the world, a strong, vibrant culture that was formed through suffering and has its own language, traditions, and secret knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation. Secrets were kept safe, and whispers moved faster than any horse, with a strong sense of group loyalty. The law in the area was Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau, a guy in his 40s who always looked tired. He wasn't mean, but he was a man of his time and place who was very dedicated to keeping things the way they were. His realism was sometimes so blasé that it seemed like he didn't care, and he only looked into the most basic things if they could upset the delicate balance of power in the church. He liked peaceful answers, even if they meant ignoring what was going on. For the Vauquelin family and the slaves who for the Vauquelin family and the slaves who lived there. His talks were a mix of angry, fiery words and calm, caring advice. He had a strong faith, and the sadness in his eyes showed that he knew a lot about how people suffer. He had seen more than most, and the things he said in a quiet way often had weight that others laughed it off. 4 months before the strange discovery, a girl from Belchaz called Celeste, who was a slave and was about 7 or 8 years old, went missing. The way her departure was handled made me feel very sluggish. Armand had just written it down in his journal as a loss, something that didn't really affect his business. Adelaide had said a quick prayer of concern, but the demands of her daily life quickly pushed the memory of a kid she barely knew to the background, one of the slaves. But for the neighborhood, Celeste's absence was a huge hole. There were rumors that children whose parents were seen as a nuisance, or whose work was no longer useful, were sold to the South. Some people talked about a darker ending, a quiet disappearance into the vast, uncaring countryside. But no one had really looked. Besides Armand's book, no official report had been turned in. Celeste had just disappeared, sucked in by the farm system's endless moor, leaving only a lingering moor. There was an uneasy feeling that cast a cloud over the sunny fields of Belchaz. The sounds then started. At first, the sounds were weak and easy to mistake for rats scampering or old wood settling. But they got stronger over time, until they could no longer be ignored. A rhythmic, scratching sound and a soft, almost melodic hum coming from the ground below the house. A sound that could break the fragile peace of Belchaz and show a truth that was much scarier than anyone could have thought. The sounds started. Nettie first noticed the scratching while she was cleaning the silver in the dining room. It was very small and hard to see. The whisper was steady and rhythmic, like tiny claws dragging across rough wood, or maybe a small animal digging. At first, she didn't think much of it, putting it down to the normal sounds of an old house at night. Rats in the walls, wind playing tricks on windows that aren't closed properly, and old beams creaking. It took a week, though, for the scratching to become more clear. Plan ahead. It was no longer a guess. A soft, almost regular beat went along with it, and sometimes a faint, high-pitched hum would come along with it, like a child's lullaby being sung through a thick blanket. Adelaide heard Nettie talk about it in a neutral way. "Mistress, there's a strange sound coming from under the house near the dining room. It's been going on for days." Adelaide waved her hand away, her attention on a dying rosebush. "No doubt, Nettie. It was just field mice. They come in because it's hot. Get one. Did any of the boys set traps?" When told, Armand just grunted and kept his eyes on a column of numbers in his notebook. "Not true. There are strong roots. It's either the wind woman or your mind." He didn't have time for such small things, especially since the price of sugar was changing all the time. But the sounds kept coming back, getting louder and more forceful. At night, when the house was very quiet, they were impossible to ignore. Adelaide, who usually sleeps well, woke up and was trying to hear. Each faint scratch and phantom hum made her heart beat faster. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like something was there, a constant, disturbing vibration that came from the ground below her house. She pictured dark, slithering things going deeper and closer. She felt sick at the thought of it. Finally, after almost 10 days of this constant noise, Adelaide finally told Armand how she felt in a rare moment of panic. "Armand, I can't fall asleep. Something is under the house. It's not mice. It's not the same." Her voice was thin and shaky from being scared and tired. Armand let out a big sigh because she was annoying him. "That's great, Adelaide. I'm going to look into this ghostly threat myself, but I want you to know that if it's just a family of opossums, I will expect you to say sorry for waking me up." That night, when there was no moon and it was humid, Armo Vla went down into the crawl space under Belchas with a light in his hand. The door was a small wooden hatch in the back of the house that was usually closed by a big stone. A wave of cool, damp air, filled with the smell of rich black earth and dead plants, rose as he lifted it. He slid down into the small space. The lantern cast moving shadows that bent and stretched the old cypress trees that held up the house. There were a lot of dark and damp spots in the crawl area. Different types of packed earth and slick mud made up the ground. The air smelled strongly of mildew and something else, almost animal, but not quite. It's completely awful. He was brushed against thick, shiny spider webs, and the sound of things moving that he couldn't see could be heard in the oppressive quiet. Armand, who usually kept things in order, felt a strange feeling of uneasiness. This was the wild, uncontrolled side of his perfectly ordered world. He moved carefully and slowly, and his boots dug a little into the soft ground. The light from the lamp cut through the darkness, shedding light on roots that wriggled like old snakes and the rough, unfinished sides of above the floors. He got to the area right below the dining room, which was where the noises were coming from. He stopped, held his breath, and listened. Then he heard it, a faint, almost unnoticeable thump, 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 like a tiny heartbeat. It wasn't scratching or humming. Just a few feet away from where he stood, it came from under the floorboards. He held up the lamp, and its light cut through the darkest corners. There, huddled in a small hole in the ground, were two people. A child was sitting between two very big cypress trees. She was so tiny that it was impossible to believe. Her body was rolled up into a ball, and her knees were pulled up to her chest. The mud and dust in her hair, which was a mess of dark, matted curls, made it hard to see most of her face. Her dark, pale skin was dirty, but there was something see-through about it, like she hadn't seen real sunshine in months. In the dim light, it was hard to tell what her clothes were made of, but they looked like they were made of rough, homespun cotton, as the lantern light. There was only a deep, ancient silence. There was only a deep, ancient silence that reflected the lantern light like smooth obsidian. The small hollow around her had a few rough handmade things, like a small clay cup that was broken and half hidden in the ground. It was faded and worn, but there was a faint design on a torn piece of fabric that she held in her small dirt. Away by scrambling. She just sat there. Away by scrambling. She just sat there, completely still and quiet, with her dark eyes fixed on Armor, who was a living, breathing mystery in the thick darkness below Belchas. The only sound that broke the long, thick, heavy silence was Arm's heart beating quickly. He had thought there might be rats or a lost dog there. He found something much better. Very scary. A child who lives by himself in the dark. A quiet witness to a truth he didn't fully understand yet. After the finding, the next morning was unbearably hot, but inside Belchas, it felt colder than a winter night. The child was brought into the house still quiet. Her small, dirty body stood out against the shiny brass and polished wood. When Nettie washed the child, her face was a mask of carefully controlled feeling. The skin on the child was the color of warm honey that has small scratches and bug bites on it. What used to be a mess of hair was now a soft, dark cloud around her face, which was surprisingly delicate even though it was thin. Still huge and dark, her eyes seemed to soak up all light, reflecting nothing but a deep, unsettling void. Adelaide gasped when she saw the child in the bright sunlight. Her hand flew to her mouth. The child was clearly starved because her arms and legs were thin and her stomach was a little swollen, but it was her eyes that really bothered her. They had for the local doctor, Dr. Prout, who was, for the local doctor, Dr. Prout, who was known for taking a practical approach to all illnesses, physical or otherwise. After an hour, Dr. Prout showed up. He was a big, skeptical man in his 50s, and his medical bag had a faint smell of detergent and old tobacco. He looked at the child with a clinical distance, prodding her with his fingers. His ear was pressed against her small chest. She was breathing quickly and shallowly, and he could feel a faint tremor in her hands and weak reactions. He made his words sound rough, so it was clear that he was malnourished and probably without any senses. It looks like she's been living in the dark for months. He was very careful not to guess how she got there, or why no one else had seen her. That wasn't his job. It was to figure out what was wrong with people. He told them to do small, frequent exercises, food, hearty broths, and lots of clean water. He also suggested a calm and quiet conversation, but he didn't think it would lead to much. He wiped his hands on a linen cloth and said, "She's like a crazy thing, Mrs. V, for clean. Wants to come back to the world." The child would not talk, just like Dr. Prout thought they would. When someone gave her food, she ate it with a quiet determination, never taking her eyes off of the person who gave it to her. She kept an eye on everything, following every move, every feeling on the faces of the people around her. She didn't whistle or sigh or make any other noise. She did nothing. She was a quiet watcher in a world that all of a sudden was full of noise and light. Even though Adelaide was shocked at first, she felt drawn to the child. She would read aloud from her favorite books for hours in the room with her. Her voice was soft and beautiful. The child would listen with her dark eyes fixed on Adelaide's face, but it was unclear if she understood a word. It was impossible to tell the word. Adelaide would brush her hair and gently comb out the knots, and the child would let her. The child's body was still very flexible. The child's silence showed a deep loneliness that matched Adelaide's own silent loneliness. Late that afternoon, Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau showed up with a sad face. Armin had sent for him because he wanted a quick and quiet answer. Thibodeau asked Armin questions, and then Adelaide questions that were mostly about what was clear. What is her name? Where did she come from? How long did she stay? As he insisted he didn't know how she got on the land, Ammon gave her vague answers. Thibodeau, who knew the beat of the parish, didn't think this answer was good enough. A child who lived under a house for months without being seen. It made sense. He then got down on his knees in front of the child and tried to question her. His voice was surprisingly soft. "Please tell me your name, little one. Where are your parents?" The child did nothing but look, her dark eyes fixed on the object in front of her, without a doubt. Thibodeau sighed and rubbed his tired face with his hand. Things were going to get tricky. It's a good sign that this story is already making you feel something. That means we're ready to go. Please click the like button once more before we go on. This really helps us keep writing stories like this one. Also, leave a note. What did you think was going on at Belches? We want to hear your ideas. Let's go back to 1858. When Nettie was carefully folding the child's few clothes, she said the most important thing. Find out. She found a small triangle-shaped piece of fabric carefully tucked into a seam among the torn pieces of what might have been a dress. It was bright blue cotton with tiny white flowers all over it. Nettie knew right away that it had a unique print on it. She had trouble breathing. That cloth was familiar to her. She had seen it before. The piece came from a dress Celeste used to own. Celeste, who had been lost for 4 months, was said to have sold south. Nettie's hands were shaking as she held the cloth, and her mind was racing. What did it mean that this kid had Celeste's dress? Celeste, was that you? Not at all. The kid was too little and too young. Celeste had been bigger, maybe 8 years old. This kid didn't look more than 5 years old, maybe 6. That being said, the cloth could not be denied. It was a thin but strong thread that linked the quiet child under the floor to Celeste, the girl who had disappeared, and to a fact that Belchas had worked hard to hide. There was a week between Reverend Fenn's visit to Belchas and the child's. Quiet suffering. And at Bella's, where quiet suffering, and at Bella's, where people were generally rude and polite, there was an air of tension that was almost palpable. When he greeted Armar and Adelaide, they gave him short, vague answers when he asked about their health. His guide, Nettie, led him to the living room, where the child was sitting in a big couch, watching him carefully. Her face was carefully blank. The time. When Reverend Fenn looked at the child, he felt a flash of deep recognition followed by a deep, aching sadness. He knelt down in front of her and reached out, but then hesitated. "Little one," he whispered, his voice heavy with sadness. "The eyes you have are Celeste's." He looked up at Adelaide with a sharp gaze. "This kid makes me think of Celeste a lot, the way she stands and how quiet she is." Adelaide, who was upset, told what happened when the child was found. Others he saw past her rank, and saw that others. He saw past her rank and saw that she had a sharp, curious mind. He was teaching her to read and write in secret while he was visiting. They started by reading from the Bible. Celeste learned things quickly. Her little fingers traced letters with eager focus, and her mind soaked up information like a sponge. She had been an interesting and bright light in a world that tried to turn down all of these lights. By putting together the scattered stories of Nettie and other slaves, a clearer but more troubling picture of Celeste began to take shape. Celeste had had strange perceptions as a child. She was good at noticing things and putting together observations that were made at different times. She spent a lot of time in the main house, where she did chores, helped Nettie, and sometimes just watched. The papers that Armand Vauclain kept in his study really interested her. He would often be seen reading over. So many numbers? And why don't some of the 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 numbers? So many numbers? And why don't some of the numbers match the people? Nettie had laughed it off and told Celeste not to worry about her master's business, which was a fear-based warning. But Celeste didn't seem to have paid attention to the warning. She had started to ask questions. They were not loud or mean, but in the setting of Belicia's they were. Bad. She had seen small mistakes or errors in the records she looked at, mostly in the ones that showed the movements of slaves and the money transactions that went with them. She had seen a certain book that Armin kept locked up in his desk. It was bound in dark leather. A notebook showed that she had seen him talk with a man from New Orleans, their voices low and tense. 3 other things happened at the same time the night Celeste went missing. At the time, events that didn't seem to have anything to do with each other. The phrase "silent child" took on a scary meaning. At first, Adelaide's small but valuable silver locket had been stolen from her vanity table. Adelaide was very upset and blamed one of the housekeepers, but no one admitted guilt, and the bracelet was never found. Second, the parish had been hit by a very bad storm with heavy rain and high winds that cut off the power and downed several old trees near the river. The chaos of the storm made it easy to hide any secret plans. Thing to do. Third, a new overseer named Silas Croft had arrived at Bellis. He was known for being very efficient and completely loyal to Armour. He replaced the previous overseer who had been more forgiving, who had been fired without any reason. The lost locket, the violent storm, and the new, cruel overseer all happened at the same time. This didn't seem like a random series of events, but rather a planned set of events meant to hide a much darker truth. It looked like Celeste had found something she wasn't supposed to see, and Armin Vauquelin really wanted to hide it. And the child who was quiet and had Celeste's eyes and fabric was live proof of that terrible secret. Belicia's has been feeling down for a long time since the child was found, and the scary things that could happen with Celeste's fabric. Adelaide was used to sticking to her routines, but the quiet girl who moved into a small room off the kitchen threw her off and kept her thinking. The child, who Adelaide had. Lily, a name that seemed to fit her delicate, almost ethereal presence, stayed silent while her dark eyes watched everything with a disturbing intensity. One hot afternoon, Adelaide found herself alone in the vast, echoing silence of Belicia's. Armand was in Baton Rouge on plantation business, and the house staff was busy with the never-ending chores of a large estate. She felt a strange, almost magnetic pull toward Armand's private study, a room she hadn't been in for a while, but was full of ledgers and documents that felt like they were not allowed. That room made her think of Armand's cold, calculated world, which she had always instinctively shied away from. But now, the silent child and Celeste's ghost made her desperate and irrational curious, which pushed her forward. It smelled like old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco when Armand left the study, which was very well organized when he left it. Along the walls were bookcases full of books on farming, the law, and economics. A big, heavy mahogany desk took up most of the. Walked up to the desk. Her heart beat hard. As Adelaide walked up to the desk, her heart beat hard against her ribs. Her fingers were shaking a little. Arm kept his most important and private papers in a locked drawer, which she knew. First, she tried the top drawer. Locked, then the second one, which was also locked. She felt hopeless all over again. What could she find? Then she looked at a small fancy silver key, half hidden under a stack of business papers on a side table. Ammon was always so careful. Had he forgotten about it, or had he been so busy that he missed it? She got a chill up her spine. It didn't seem like an accident as much as it did like a planned, almost taunting invitation. She took a deep, shaky breath and picked up the key. It felt cold and heavy in her hand. When she went back to the desk, the third drawer opened with a soft click. Inside, there was one dark, leather-bound ledger tucked in among other papers. It was thicker, older, and worn out than the other books she had seen Armand read. That was it. This was the book Celeste had seen, the one with the wrong numbers. Adelaide took it out with cold hands. She could feel how smooth and cool the leather was. When she opened it, she could smell the faint musty smell of old paper. Armand's clear, beautiful writing, columns of numbers, dates, and names filled the pages. It wasn't just the names of goods or crops. There were names of people and, more often than not, scary dates next to them that showed when they were born and when they died. As she started to read, her eyes quickly moved across the entries. Her throat felt tight with breath. There were records of what was bought, sold, and moved to other farms. But then she saw things that really scared her. After the names and dates, there were cryptic notes that said things like lost to fever, runaway, presumed dead, disappeared, and no trace. And below these, often a small change in the budget that you hardly notice, a quiet write-off. It was the horror of paperwork, accounting, and a system that had become so normalized that people's lives and sudden, unexplained stops were logged with the same level of objectivity as a broken tool or a failed crop. She looked at a certain post from 4 months ago and stopped. Celeste, next to the name, wasn't given to Mr. Dubois or moved to Evergreen Plantation. She just vanished. No sign, the number was changed, and then a small, almost imperceptible. A sign. A small bird drawn by hand that looked exactly like the one the quiet child was holding. Adelaide quickly looked back to the page before. Under a different writing that had been erased, there was the same small bird, then another, then another. With a terrible lurch, she realized it wasn't a sign of loss. It was a sign of getting rid of something. A quick and quiet way to erase a life, erase it from the books, erase it from the world. And the changes to the finances, the value-adjusted notes, were not for losses, but for gains, the quiet, hard to find. Makes money off of lives that just disappeared. Then she saw something else that was almost hidden in the very back of the notebook. It was a kid's rough, hesitant drawing on a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't Armand's neat handwriting. It showed a small stick figure by itself, lying under a big, scary house. In the corner of the picture, there was the same small hand-carved wooden bird that Lily was holding with the quiet child. It looked a lot like a signature. There was nothing taken by Adelaide. She was unable to. Her hands, financial reports, and her moves were so financial reports, and her moves were so smooth they were almost mechanical. It was quiet in the house when she shut the study door behind her. The click of the latch could be heard throughout. That night, she sat down to dinner in the grand dining room, which was lit by candles. When Armand got back from Baton Rouge, he talked about new machines and the price of sugar. Adelaide. She knew too. She knew who he was. She was the one who had been there. 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 She knew too. She knew who he was. She was sure she would never look at him the same way again. The scary thing wasn't the screams, but the silence, the ledger, the quiet, effective eraser of lives, and the small bird that was hand-carved and linked Celeste, who was no longer there, to the child who was silently lying on the floor. Just when we thought. Now that we know what was going on at Belch's farm, the horror grows. It's not the loud kind, it whispers. Feel free to share this story with a friend who likes scary stories and hit the like button to let us know you're here. We're going to tell you a lot more. Everyone but Adelaide didn't know much about Lily, the quiet kid. As the days turned into weeks, she still couldn't make a sound. Dr. Prout's soft persuasion, Nettie's kindness, and Reverend Fenn's. Of inspiration, Adelaide gave Lily A of inspiration. Adelaide gave Lily a charcoal stick and a piece of paper. The little girl took them, and her little fingers closed around the charcoal in a grip that looked almost desperate. After that, she started to draw. The way she drew made it look like she was trying to say everything out loud but couldn't. It was surprising how sure she was when she moved her small hand. Over the course of 2 weeks, she made 8 drawings. Each one was a discovery that answered one question and brought up 3 more. They looked rough and innocent, like they were drawn by a child. Still, their disrespect was terrible. The first picture was of a big, scary house. The columns were stark white, and the windows were dark and empty. Under the house, there was a small bent figure that was hard to tell apart from the shadows. From the crawl hole, it looked like Belchas were seen from below. The second picture was of a woman. She is tall and thin, and her hair is long and flowing. You couldn't make out her face, but her hands were outstretched, like she was reaching out or begging. A smaller person, a kid with the same dark, matted curls as Lily, stood next to her. She jumped when she realized that this was Celeste and maybe her mother, or another woman who had cared for her. The third picture, which was more abstract, was made up of dark lines that swirled together like a storm. There were only the faintest outlines of falling trees and a scared little face looking out from behind a thick wall of clouds. Root. It was the evening that Celeste went missing. The big storm night seen through the eyes of a child who hid under the house. The fourth picture was so simple that it scared me. It showed a big, tall man with a blank square for a face and a small, dark object in his hand. Another, smaller person with a very mean sneer stood next to him. The new boss, Silas Croft, was there, and the man with the blank look could only be Armand. The dark thing Armand was holding wasn't clear, but what it meant was, okay. The fifth picture was a rough scroll of numbers that could be seen as figures. A small hand-drawn bird was under them. It looked the same as the bird Lily was holding, and the one Adelaide had seen in Armand's notebook. Celeste was trying to get the numbers she had seen, the differences she had noticed, and the changes in money that marked the end of a life across. The sixth picture might have been the scariest. It showed a small box that was open. Inside, there was a dark, fuzzy form instead of a treasure. Someone dropped something into the box, and there were a few small, dark figures that looked like shadows watching it. There was something being buried, something being hidden, and something being thrown away. The seventh drawing was of a small metal locket with a unique design on it. That was Adelaide's locket, the one she had lost the night Celeste went missing. The child had seen it and seen it go away, and now, through her art, she was telling what happened to it. The last and eighth drawing was was the child's self-portrait. Proof that was the child's self-portrait. Proof that she existed. Her quiet watch. Her deep and scary witness. With a heavy heart, Adelaide put the pictures on the table in the living room. Somehow, she was sure that these were not just silly drawings. It made her feel cold to the core. They were proof, an admission in silence and a terrifying. A story told with charcoal and paper. Armand came back from Baton Rouge that evening in a bad mood after a tough discussion. When he walked into the room, he thought Adelaide would be doing her usual quiet things. Instead, he saw her standing over the table, looking at the pictures with a pale face. He walked up to her with a wrinkled brow showing irritation. When he saw the pictures, his voice stopped working. "What is this, Adelaide? More of the child's nonsense?" The house from below, the wind he yelled. "Where did she get these 100 and ish?" yelled. "Where did she get these ideas?" His voice rang through the empty house. "Who has been telling her lies like these?" Adelaide looked up at him. Her eyes, which are usually very shy, were now filled with a quiet, fierce determination. "Armin," she drew what she saw, what she heard, and what you did. The fight was very rough, There had been a fight of wills between them for years, but nothing major. Armin denied everything, and his denials got crazier and more desperate as Adelaide carefully pointed to each drawing and explained what horrifying meaning it held. He said she was crazy and giving in to the beliefs of slaves. But Adelaide stood strong. Her voice stayed steady, and she was sure of what she believed. He knew she knew, and she knew he knew. The next day, Deputy Sheriff Tibito went back to Belicia's because Armour had sent him a tour note. He found. Armour was walking around the living room, his face red and his eyes wide. Adelaide sat still with her drawings nicely stacked next to her. Tibito, who liked to stay out of trouble, listened to Armin's angry charges against Adelaide and then looked at the drawings. His tired eyes looked at each picture, and a slow dawning understanding spread across his face. He knew what the locket was. He recognized the rough drawing of Silas Croft, whom he knew to be cruel. He knew the numbers, the chillingly simple ones of the entries that fled. He looked at the drawings, then at Armand, then at Adelaide, and then back at that. There was no sound in the room at all. A carriage pulled up the drive before Tibito could speak. Two men with serious faces and dark clothes came out. They came from Baton Rouge and were sent by Armin's important friends, men who wanted to keep the parish's delicate balance of power and the smooth flow of business. When they showed up, it was a clear sign. This had to be taken care of in a quiet, quick, and without any drama. But Reverend Fenn had already done something while he had been quietly watching the story play out. While everyone in the house was fighting, he took the time to carefully copy each of Lily's drawings by drawing them on pieces of paper that he kept sewn into the inside of his worn-out travel coat. They were more than just kids' art. He was sure of it because of his faith and life experience. They were a voice that spoke the truth that needed to be kept alive. Though it had to wait until everyone was ready to listen, it had to be heard. The long period of silence that would fall over Belchas began when the men from Baton Rouge showed up. They weren't really police officers. Instead, they were powerful people whose job it was to stop any incident that could threaten the parish's fragile social and economic order. A man named Deputy Sheriff Tibito, who knew the unspoken rules of his world, was quietly convinced to. He should end his probe. The official report said that the child, Lily, had run away from a nearby farm and was having trouble remembering things. It also said that Celeste had been sold south and no one knew where she was. People thought the pictures were just the child's confused thoughts after being hurt. The truth was much more sneaky, though. Lily, the quiet kid, was taken away from Belchas in a quiet way. No public record was ever made of where she went. Some said she was sent to a New Orleans home, while others said she was. Taken by a distant cousin of Adelaide's, away from Louisiana's nosy people. Belchas had many unanswered questions about her, like if she ever spoke or found peace, and what happened to her. These questions were lost in the vast, uncaring scenery of the past. But Adelaide Vauquelin made a choice that cost her everything and saved something else. The fight with Armalong and the scary discoveries in the ledger and the drawings had broken the flimsy illusion of her life. She was no longer able to live in the house of secrets in the dark with a man she now thought was evil. A few weeks after Lily was taken away, Adelaide told everyone at Belchas that she was going to leave because she was sick and needed spiritual comfort. She moved to a small, quiet house in Charleston, South Carolina, which was where she grew up. She only brought a few personal items with her and a deep, unwavering sadness. She never talked about Belsius again, but her quiet acts of kindness and her never-ending work with children who had lost their parents were a silent testament to the fact that she knew inside. She gave up her marriage, her home, and her peace of mind to save her own life. Armand Vauquelin stayed at Belsius and didn't seem to be affected by what was going on. The men from Baton Rouge made sure that no official charges or public claims were ever made against the man. However, he was already beginning to fall apart slowly and quietly. He slowly lost the cold, calculated accuracy that had made him famous. He shut down more. His eyes became gloomy, and his once perfect ledgers were sometimes messed up by. Looked away. No one ever talked to him, looked away. No one ever talked to him, charged him, or put his name in any legal record. But the fact that no one spoke became his prison. When Bellis died, his kingdom turned into a tomb. 10 years later, he died, a lonely and angry man. His fame and wealth went downhill, and rumors about him never really went away. Nettie was a strong woman who kept to herself. Truths. Even though the Civil War was going on at the time, she took a chance in 1863 and left Belsius to go to New Orleans. She got a job as an heiress, and her sharp mind and ability to notice things helped her in the busy city. She never told anyone about Belsius's secrets, but the event with Celeste and the child who didn't speak stuck in her mind. A quiet sadness that she kept with her until the day she died. Reverend Fenn, on the other hand, wouldn't let the truth be buried completely. He kept going on his journey. Preaching, and his sermons became more passionate and focused on justice and the worth of every person. The copies of the pictures were carefully kept by him. They were sewn into the inside of his coat as a promise. In 1871, an old man whose health was getting worse lay dying in a small house in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. He called for a young man named Devo, who was a smart and sincere student at a Methodist school and had helped him a lot. Fenn gave Devo a small wooden box that was worn smooth over time. There were carefully wrapped in linen things inside. The copies of Lily's drawings and 3 pages of Fenn's carefully written evidence about what happened at Belsius, the ledger, the disappearances, and the scary implications. "Son, these are not just drawings," Fenn had said in a low voice. "They are a voice that needs to be heard one day." Devo, who was honest and had strong beliefs, knew how much trust was being put in him. He kept the box and was very careful of what was inside it. He looked at the sketches. When I read Fenn's statement, I realized what a terrible thing it was for people. There wasn't yet a good time. The war scars were still too fresh, and the desire to forget was too strong. But like Fenn's, he thought that the truth would soon rise to the surface, like water. He would spend his whole life quietly fighting for fairness, memory, and the words of those who had been silenced. He would always keep the box and its scary contents safe, as well as Belsius. The grand house was once A. The Louisiana jungle slowly took over the building, which was a sign of wealth and power. The sugarcane fields that were carefully looked to in the past got overgrown and were taken over by nature. The columns fell apart, the paint peeled off, and the verandas sank. More than just leaves and wood, the air filled with the smell of decay. It smelled like lost hopes and hidden truths. The dark and damp crawl room below it all was never used again. Nobody was brave enough to go deep into it because it was known in the quiet, silent language of the land. That it held more than just the ground. It held the sounds of a child who was not speaking, and the deep, scary truth about what lived and died under Belsius's floors. It turns out that monsters under the bed have never been the scariest thing in history. There were men at the dinner table, and those who knew kept quiet. How do you think things really went at Belsius? Share your idea in the space below. I read all of them. If this story made you feel anything, please click the ring the bell and send this to someone who needs to hear it.